Here is a question that almost nobody asks out loud. The United States of America is, right now, the single largest oil producer on the entire planet, according to the USS Energy Information Administration. American wells pumped a record 13.6 million barrels of crude oil every single day in 2025. We produce more oil than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than anyone in history. And yet, at this very moment, American aircraft carriers are in the Persian Gulf. American pilots are flying combat missions over a country 7,000 miles away, and American taxpayers are watching oil prices spike past $115 a barrel because of a war we chose to fight, in somebody else's backyard, over somebody else's oil. So here's the open loop for this entire video, and I promise you we will close it before we are done. If America is energy independent, what are we really fighting for? Welcome back. If you have been following this series, you already know how the Iran-Israel conflict started, how Operation Roaring Lion was planned, how Iranian missiles work, and why America backs Israel. Today, we're going upstream, past the missiles, past the politics, past the personalities, all the way to the one thing that has driven 80 years of American foreign policy in the Middle East: oil. But not in the simple, we just want their oil way you've probably heard before. The real answer is far more interesting and far more relevant to your gas prices right now. Let us start with the map. Picture the globe in your mind. Somewhere around 2/3 to 3/4 of all known oil reserves on planet Earth are concentrated in one region, not across the whole world, not spread out evenly. 2/3 to 3/4 sitting in a patch of desert roughly the size of the continental United States. That is what Brookings Institution, one of America's oldest think tanks, has documented for decades. Now, let's zoom in. According to Worldometer's 2025 reserve data, Saudi Arabia sits on 267 billion barrels of proven oil. That is the second largest reserve in the world, behind Venezuela. But here is the important distinction. Venezuela's oil is mostly thick, tar-like heavy crude that is expensive and difficult to refine. Saudi Arabia's oil is the good stuff. Light, sweet crude, cheap to extract, easy to refine. Saudi Aramco, the state-owned oil company, can pump a barrel of oil for roughly $2 to $3 in production cost. That same barrel sells on the open market for over $100 right now. That is the most profitable extraction ratio in human history. Iran sits on 208 billion barrels, third in the world. Iraq has 145 billion barrels. Kuwait, the UAE, and smaller Gulf states together add tens of billions more. But here is the pattern interrupt, and I want you to really sit with this number. The Middle East, according to the New Lines Institute, accounts for roughly 30% of global oil. PR reduction, but holds 67 to 75% of ALL Qanun reserves. That means the rest of the world, Russia, the United States, Canada, Africa, is burning through its reserves much faster than the Middle East is. Long-term, the world gets more dependent on this region, not less. And then there is the shipping choke point. Approximately 20 million barrels of oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz every single day, as we covered in our first video in this series. That is about 20% of the world's entire daily oil supply flowing through a channel that, at its narrowest, is only 21 nautical miles wide. One waterway. 20% of the world's oil. That is the geography that makes this region so irreplaceable. And right now, as of March 2026, according to Al Jazeera and AP News, oil has already spiked past $115 a barrel because that waterway is effectively closed. So we have established who has the oil and why its geography makes it impossible to ignore. Now let's track how America got so deeply entangled, because this story goes back further than most people realize. The year is 1945. World War II is almost over. President Franklin Roosevelt is physically dying. He will pass away just 2 months later. But on February 14th, on the deck of the USS Quincy in the Great Bitter Lake of Egypt, Roosevelt meets with King Abdulaziz ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia. It is an extraordinary scene, a frail American president, paralyzed from the waist down, meeting a desert king who had never left the Arabian Peninsula before and reportedly refused to allow smoking or drinking on the ship. According to the Harvard Epicenter, the deal they struck that day became the foundation of everything that followed. Saudi Arabia provides a reliable supply of oil, The United States provides military protection against any great power threat, oil for security. That is the original bargain, and it has been running, in various forms, for 80 years. Now here is the part that almost never gets taught in school. 3 years later, as the Cold War was beginning, President Harry Truman was secretly terrified of one specific nightmare scenario: the Soviet Union seizing the Middle East oil fields. According to Brookings, citing recently declassified National Security Council documents, Truman's administration developed a detailed plan, signed as NSC 26-2 in 1949, that called for moving explosives into the Middle East. The plan: if the Soviets ever invaded and took control of the oil fields, the United States and Britain would blow the whole thing up, destroy the refineries, plug the wells, deny the oil to the enemy. They even considered using radiological weapons, what we would call dirty bombs, to contaminate the fields. That idea was ultimately rejected, but only because analysts worried the Soviets would force workers into the contaminated zones anyway. Think about that. The very first American strategy for Middle East oil was not get the oil. It was make sure nobody else gets it either. That deny the enemy logic has never gone away. It just changed enemies. Then came 1953. Pattern interrupt. This one is important. Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, tried to nationalize Iran's oil, meaning he wanted Iran to own and control its own oil rather than British and American companies. The CIA and British intelligence launched Operation Ajax. Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah was reinstated. Western oil companies kept their contracts. According to the Council on Foreign Relations timeline, this was one of the first covert uses of American power specifically to protect oil interests. And as we covered in our Iran-Israel history video, that coup planted the seeds of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which created the enemy America is fighting right now, 70 years later. In 1960, OPEC was founded, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, by Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Venezuela. For the first time, producing nations had collective bargaining power over the price of their own resource. Then 1973 happened. And if you want to understand why America treats Middle Eastern oil with such obsessive strategic care, this is the year. When the United States backed Israel in the Yom Kippur War, Arab OPEC members declared an oil embargo. They simply stopped selling oil to America and its Western allies. According to the Federal Reserve's own historical records, oil prices went from about $3 a barrel to nearly $12, a 400% increase in just a few months. Americans sat in lines for hours at gas stations. The speed limit was dropped to 55 miles per hour nationally. The stock market collapsed. The economy went into stagflation, high inflation, and low growth simultaneously. A combination that economists had said was supposed to be impossible. One political decision, 7,000 miles away, had brought the most powerful economy on Earth to its knees. And then, this is the part that stayed secret for decades. The Nixon administration sent Treasury Secretary William Simon to Saudi Arabia in 1974. According to Investopedia, and confirmed by government documents released in 2016, the deal struck was this: Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, the United States would buy Saudi oil and provide weapons and military protection. And crucially, the hundreds of billions in oil revenues that Saudi Arabia collected in dollars would be recycled back, invested in US Treasury bonds, financing American government debt. This is the Petrodollar system. And it is, to this day, one of the primary reasons the USS dollar remains the global reserve currency. Every country that needs to buy oil has to hold US dollars. Every country that holds US dollars is essentially lending money to the American government. It is a financial architecture that funds American power, and it was built on Middle Eastern oil. Then came 1979. The Iranian Revolution doubled oil prices again. And then came 1980, and President Jimmy Carter, responding to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the fall of the Shah, delivered what became known as the Carter Doctrine. According to Britannica, Carter stated clearly, any attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States of America, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. America had just officially declared the Middle East's oil fields a line in the sand. In 1990, when Iraq's Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait sitting on almost 100 billion barrels of oil, the United States organized a 42-nation coalition and launched Operation Desert Storm. According to the Gulf War Wikipedia entry, within 100 hours of ground combat, Iraq was expelled from Kuwait. The oil fields were saved. And then came the shale revolution. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Here is the moment we've been building toward. Because by around 2015, something remarkable happened. American engineers, using horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking, unlocked massive oil reserves trapped in shale rock formations across Texas, North Dakota, and Pennsylvania. According to the USS Energy Information Administration, by 2025 America was producing a record 13.6 million barrels of crude oil per day, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than anyone ever. The United States became a net oil exporter. And yet, here we are, in March 2026, with American forces in the Persian Gulf, oil prices spiking past $115 a barrel, and the National Economic Director Kevin Hassett telling Bloomberg that the administration has no plans to tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So I need to answer the open-loop question directly. If America produces its own oil, why does it still bleed and spend to control the Middle East's oil? There are 4 reasons, and all 4 of them are operating simultaneously right now. Reason number 1, the oil market is global and seamless. This is the thing that trips people up most. Even if America produces all the oil it needs, oil trades as one worldwide commodity with one price. When Middle Eastern supply gets disrupted, it does not just raise prices in Dubai, it raises prices everywhere, including at your gas station in Ohio. As Brookings puts it, we are all sipping from the same cup. America buying its own oil does not insulate it from a global price shock. Right now, your gas prices are going up not because your local refinery stopped working, but because Iraq just cut its oil output by 70% according to oil price. And Kuwait just declared force majeure, and the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. Texas shale cannot fix that overnight. Reason number 2, the petrodollar architecture. This one is subtle but massive. In June 2024, Saudi Arabia's 50-year petrodollar agreement quietly expired and was not renewed. This sent headlines screaming about the end of the petrodollar. But wait, here is the but, actually. According to Bloomberg's own analysis, while the formal agreement lapsed, Saudi Arabia has not actually switched to selling oil in yuan or euros in any significant volume. The dollar's dominance in oil trading persists not because of a piece of paper, but because of the sheer depth and liquidity of dollar financial markets. No other currency can handle the volume. As Bloomberg put it bluntly, the petrodollar is dead. Long live the petrodollar. But, and this is crucial, if America loses control of the Middle East, if a hostile power starts dictating oil pricing in a different currency, that changes. China has been quietly pushing to settle some oil trades in yuan. Russia is doing the same. The petrodollar is under slow, steady pressure. The Middle East is where that pressure is being applied. Reason number 3, denying the enemy. But the enemy has changed. Remember Truman's plan to blow up the oil fields rather than let the Soviets have them. That logic never went away. According to Brookings, the underlying American concern has always been, if Iraq or Iran or any hostile power enriched itself by taking control of additional oil reserves, that regime would soon become more menacing to the United States. During the Cold War, the enemy was the Soviet Union. Now, it is China. Here is the number that explains everything. According to Politico's analysis from March 2026, China received about 50% of its imported oil from the 6 Gulf countries that depend on the Strait of Hormuz in 2025. China is the world's largest oil importer, consuming around 17 million barrels per day. And as the New Lines Institute reported, China was buying roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports, about 1.38 million barrels per day. When the United States and Israel struck Iran, they did not just hit a military adversary, they cut off China's primary oil supplier. Politico described this as a strategic masterstroke for American energy leverage. If China controls the Middle East through economic relationships, military alliances, or simply by being the dominant outside power, then China controls the price of oil for every country on Earth. That is leverage over Japan, South Korea, India, Germany, France, every nation that depends on imported energy. And right now, according to Reuters, the United States and China hold the keys to containing a Mideast oil shock. That means the United States currently holds one of those keys, because it controls the region militarily. Reason number 4. Allied dependency is American leverage. You might ask, okay, what does it matter if our allies are dependent on Middle Eastern oil? Here is the but, actually, on that. When Japan, South Korea, and much of Europe depend on American military presence to keep Middle Eastern oil flowing, they are also dependent on American foreign policy decisions. They cannot easily tell Washington, we disagree with you on China, when it is the American Fifth Fleet that keeps their energy supplies secure. This is soft power on a global scale, built on the hard reality of oil geography. According to the South China Morning Post, mainland China imports vast amounts of oil from the Middle East, but India, South Korea, and others could fare worse, citing Morgan Stanley analysts. In other words, the Middle East is not just an oil source. It is a pressure point for almost every major relationship in global geopolitics. So, where are we right now, and what do the next months look like? As of this week, according to AP News, oil has briefly spiked near $120 a barrel as the Iran war intensifies. Iraq's oil output has plunged 70%, from 4.3 million barrels per day down to about 1.3 million, according to oilprice.com. Kuwait has declared force majeure and cut production after Iranian threats made safe export through the Strait of Hormuz impossible, according to CNBC. The UAE has started reducing output as well, according to Bloomberg via Yahoo Finance. OPEC+, the alliance of OPEC members plus Russia, tried to calm markets by announcing an increase of 206,000 barrels per day starting in April 2026. According to the OPEC press release and Fortune's reporting, Saudi Arabia has boosted exports as a contingency, raising output to ensure stable flows if military action affects regional supply. But let's put this in perspective. 206,000 extra barrels per day is a rounding error when you are losing millions of barrels per day from Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, and the Hormuz blockade simultaneously. The Goldman Sachs warning that oil could breach $100 a barrel within days came from The Guardian on March 8th. Oil has already blown past that. The question now is whether we approach 130 or 150. The USS Strategic Petroleum Reserve holds about 415 million barrels as of February 2026, according to the Department of Energy. That is a significant buffer. But Trump told reporters, according to Reuters, oil prices are a small price to pay for defeating Iran. And according to Bloomberg, National Economic Director Kevin Hassett confirmed the U.S. has no plans to tap the SPR. At $115 a barrel, American gasoline is already surging. Based on current trajectories, analysts from Investopedia and others project pump prices could hit $4 to $6 a gallon if this holds. You will feel this at the pump within weeks if it has not already started. Here is the wild card in all of this. According to a Times Now analysis and a Fox News opinion piece, China may actually be quietly benefiting from this war in ways nobody is admitting out loud. China cannot get Iranian oil through the Strait of Hormuz right now, but China is pivoting to discounted Russian oil. Meanwhile, the United States is spending enormous military resources in the Gulf, depleting weapons stockpiles and absorbing economic pain at home. If the war drags on, China sits back, buys cheap Russian crude, lets America exhaust itself, and waits. The Economist described this conflict as potentially the biggest oil shock in years. And a Yahoo Finance analysis cited an analyst saying a prolonged Hormuz disruption could lead to a guaranteed global recession. 3 scenarios for the next 90 days. 1. Rapid de-escalation. Iran's leadership collapses or agrees to terms, the strait reopens, oil falls back toward $80, gas prices stabilize. Possible but not the leading scenario right now. 2. Prolonged air campaign with partial Hormuz opening. Oil stabilizes somewhere between $90 and $120. Gasoline stays elevated at $3.50 to $4.50. A painful drag on the economy but not a catastrophe. 3. Extended Hormuz closure past 30 days. According to the long-yield analysis we cited in our first video, this raises the probability of a global recession above 75%, with GDP contraction of 1.5 to 3%. Oil pushes toward $130 to $150. Gasoline hits $5 to $6 a gallon in the United States. Watch two indicators. First, whether tanker traffic through Hormuz begins to recover. Bloomberg reported there were only 9 empty supertankers visible in the Persian Gulf on March 6, 2026. Second, watch Saudi Arabia. If Riyadh increases its output significantly, that is the best hope for price stabilization without a political deal. Let's close the loop. America is the world's largest oil producer. That part is true. But America is not the world's largest oil controller. The Middle East controls the world's oil. It holds 2/3 to 3/4 of all known reserves. It sits behind the single most critical choke point on Earth. And whoever shapes what happens in that region shapes the price of energy, and therefore the cost of living, for virtually every person on Earth. America cares about Middle Eastern oil not primarily because it needs it for itself. America cares because it cannot afford to let a rival power, first the Soviet Union, now China, gain decisive control over that resource. Because if they do, the petrodollar erodes, American allies lose their dependency, and the entire architecture of American global power, built on 8 decades of aircraft carriers, oil deals, and covert operations, that is what is really at stake in the Persian Gulf right now. Not just the price at the pump, though that is real and you will feel it, but the deeper question of who runs the global economy in the next 50 years. In our next video, we are going to go somewhere almost no major outlet is covering directly, the role Russia is playing in this conflict. Because while America and Israel are in a direct war with Iran, Russia is providing satellite targeting data to Iranian missile forces. We covered the hit rate improvement earlier in this series, but the Russian angle goes much deeper. Stay tuned for that one. If this video gave you something you did not know before, hit subscribe. Share it with one person who talks about gas prices and has no idea why they are going up. And drop a comment, do you think the United States should tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve right now? Let me know. We will see you in the next one.